Hello and welcome to another tier list video. Today we are taking a look at the Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition unique units. Now Age of Empires 2 is a game that's been very near and dear to my heart for many years. I remember playing, Age of Conquerors back on the CD, 10, 15 years ago. And, still to this day, it's a game that I still enjoy playing quite a bit. I am by no means an expert, so take everything I say with this list with a hefty grain of salt, but I do really enjoy playing the game quite a bit, and I have experience using all the unique units, all the different civilizations. So the way I'm going to be ranking these is not just on strength, how strong is the unit. Because I'm not the most competitive player, it's more so going to be how much do I personally enjoy building the unit. So I am going to consider strength of the unit, but I'm also going to be looking at, how fun is it to use, how easy is it to get a big army of them. Just how much fun do I have when I'm using this unique unit. So starting us off, we have Arambai, which is the Burmese unique unit. These are the basically mounted inaccurate dart throwers. And Arambai, I would say they are pretty strong, especially if you get a group of them, of at least like 5 or 6. You can run through your opponent's economy and just one-shot villagers. But Arambai, you really need a decent group of them. And I will say Elite Arambai, really not that impressive. Arambai, super strong in Castle Age, but when you get into Imperial Age, I feel like Elite Arambai kind of falls off compared to other units, so in Castle Age, I'd say it's an A tier, but the rest of the game probably is C tier, so Arambai will average out to a B tier. Up next, we have the Khmer Ballista Elephant. Now, it's basically a scorpion elephant, so a scorpion with a ton of HP and no minimum range. So you think, yeah, that sounds pretty good, scorpions are good, but no. Ballista Elephants, honestly, the damage is just so weak, and even when you get the double ballista attack, so it fires 2 projectiles, it's still just so weak and underwhelming. Even if you have a huge mass of ballista elephants, it still doesn't feel like they're doing a lot of damage. Sure, they're tanky, but they take so much resources, and at the end of the day, you're just better off building really anything else as Khmer. So ballista elephants, sorry, but you're going to find yourself down in the D tier. Up next, we have Berserks. Now, honestly, these things just look cool. I've always loved the Viking unique unit. Way back in the day, I think on the original version, the Age of Conquerors, they were one of the coolest looking unique units in that game. They just look so cool with like their cape and their shield and their sword. And they're so much fun to use. They regenerate health, they destroy buildings, they destroy infantry. Just a super fun unit for me. Berserk's gonna find themselves up in the S tier. Up next, we have Bowars. These guys are okay. They're kind of considered to be mounted Teutonic Knights because they have, decent attack, but a lot of melee armor. I think the elite Boyar has like 10 melee armor now, which is really high. But honestly, I don't really think that they look that cool visually. And while they are really tanky, they're not necessarily that much stronger than, something like Paladin in terms of damage output. So they're good. But honestly, they're just really nothing too special. They're just tanky paladins is what I would consider them to be. So they're cool, they're strong, but for me, I don't really like using them that much. They don't look that cool, they don't feel that great to use. So they're going to find themselves in the C tier. Up next, we have Camel Archers. Honestly, these things look pretty cool, and they are really strong and really fun to use. They're super easy to micro, they're super quick, they have a really high damage output. Honestly, as Berbers, I pretty much always go for Camel Archers and just spam a ton. I know Berbers, they got the discounted knights, but I always go for Camel Archers. I love building this unit. I love massing them up. Camel Archers, honestly, one of my favorite ranged units in the game, and they're going to find themselves up in the S tier as well. Up next, we have the Genitor, which is the mounted skirmisher that the Berbers and any Berber allies can build. It's a decent unit, but in my opinion, it's just really not quite worth the resources. They're pretty expensive as far as a trash unit goes, and they're decent, but they're really not that great. If you want a mounted unit, you probably don't want to go for a Genitor. Just build regular skirmishers. They're like half the price or something, and they're, just as good, just not as quick. So Genitor is going to find themselves down in the C tier. Up next, we have Cataracts. Now, Elite Cataracts, I love this unit. It's expensive to get there in the game, but once you do, they are so good, and they're so fun to mass. Even, if the enemy's spamming like pikemen or halberdier, Cataphracts, sure, they might be countered by them, but they have bonus against infantry. And so Cataphracts just feel really good to build in pretty much any game. And they are, in my opinion, the coolest looking mounted unit in the game. The way their horse is completely armored, I mean, they look so cool. Absolutely love Cataphracts. One of my favorite unique units in the game for sure. Definitely going to be in the S tier. Up next, we have Chikun, which is the Chinese unique unit. And basically, it's a crossbowman, which fires a bunch of different projectiles. I think it's 3 for the standard unit and 4 for the elite. And honestly, it's a pretty strong unit, and it feels pretty good to use, even against something with high pierce armor, because, you know, you're firing multiple shots. So even if they have high pierce armor, you're dealing a minimum of 4 damage if you're hitting all 4 of your shots with the elite Chikun. So it feels pretty good, and if you can get a mass of them, I mean, you pretty much just melt everything. But I'm personally not a huge fan of, you know, unmounted archer units. I feel like they're a bit too slow, a bit too clunky sometimes, and I just get destroyed by mangonel shots. So Chikun, they're really good, but, you know, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of unmounted archer units, so they'll only find themselves in the B tier. Up next, we have the Conquistador, the Spanish unique unit. And Conquistadors for me are kind of like Arambai, where in Castle Age they feel really good to use and they're super fun. I mean, you get a mass of like 15-20 Conquistadors in Castle Age, and the game is pretty much just over right there. Like, I don't feel like there's anything that the enemy can do when I get a mass that size in Castle Age. You know, even just like 3 or 4 of them running through your enemy's eco, you're just, you know, 2-3 shotting villagers. Feels super good to use. In Imperial Age, I will say Elite Conquistadors are still good, definitely stronger than Elite Arambai in Imperial Age, but I do feel like they fall off a little bit compared to, you know, something else. If the enemy's got Paladin, you know, Elite Conquistador is kind of falling off at that point in the game, but still a strong unit nonetheless, still fun to use. And, you know, every time I think of Conquistadors, I always think of the El Cid campaign, which is one of my favorite campaigns, so kind of for that reason, I'm a little bit biased, but Conquistadors will find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Castiliar Kustier. I have no idea what the proper pronunciation of it is. You guys can correct me if you know how to say it. But anyways, this is the Burgundian unique unit, and it's really interesting because it has the charge effect, where it deals a lot of damage for its first attack, and then really low damage until it's fully charged up again. This unit is okay. I'm not a huge fan of its mechanic personally, but it definitely does have its uses, honestly. Like, if you get like groups of 2 of these units and running through your enemy's eco in Castle Age, you know, 2 of them can one-shot a villager with 1 hit, and then they just run away. You let them recharge, have them run back into the enemy eco again, you know, one-shot another villager. So it definitely has its use cases, but in like a battle and a head-to-head fight, it really feels like it's a little bit too gimmicky for me. So, you know, it has its place, it has its uses, but not really the best, so it's going to find itself down in the C tier for me. Up next, we have the Flemish Militia, which is the other Burgundian unique unit. This unit, of course, is generated when you research Flemish Revolution, which turns all your villagers into Flemish Militia, which is, as some people think, it's an overpowered technology. I don't think it's overpowered, at least not at my elo, but it is really strong. But it's not really strong because Flemish Militia are overpowered. It's more so just because you're getting, you know, 100 to 150 to potentially even 200 military instantly. It could really be any military unit with that technology and it'd be good. But Flemish Militia are definitely not bad. They're kind of a hybrid between a two-handed swordsman and a halberdier, because they have bonus against cavalry, and they also have bonus against buildings, which is nice. So it's a strong unit, but not really super overpowered or anything. And you can build them from town centers after you research the technology, but nobody really does that because the unit is just not anything fantastic. So they're cool, but mostly cool because you get like 150 to 200 of them when you research the technology, but they'll still find themselves in the C tier. Up next, we have Elephant Archers. Now, this is the Indian unique unit, and in my opinion, the worst unique unit in the game, bar none. I mean, this unit, its damage output is so incredibly low, it's so slow, its range is garbage. There's just nothing redeeming about the Elephant Archer, with the exception of one thing. It's tanky. That's it. You know, if you need a damage sponge, you know, sure, build Elephant Archers, but they are horrible. Pretty much the only time that they're gonna win in like an exchange or a trade in terms of equal resources is maybe like up against other archers, because, you know, they can tank so many shots and they're just taking like 1 or 2 damage a shot, and then they're dealing, you know, 5 or 6 damage a shot. But they attack slowly. They have this weird bonus like 4 damage against buildings. I don't really get it, but I can't stand this unit. It's expensive, it's slow, it's clunky, low damage, low range. I never like building this unit. Definitely going to be in the F tier for me. Up next, we have the Gabeto, which is the Malian unique unit. Now, this thing is kind of like a glass cannon throwing axeman. Standard Gabeto, only 30 HP, which I believe is by far the lowest HP on any unique unit. and you really feel it because Gabetos, they have high attack. They're kind of quick, you know, not as quick as like an eagle or something, but they're kind of quick. But their attack speed is so slow, and there's a huge delay from when you click to attack something to when they actually throw their projectile. They're not that accurate. They don't really benefit from ballistics. Sure, they're strong in terms of their damage output because it's technically melee damage. But really don't like this unit. They get destroyed by pretty much everything. I mean, even if the enemy is sending melee units, which is what they're supposed to counter, melee infantry that is, it still feels like the Gabeto lose just because they have such low HP, garbage armor. Even Elite Gabeto, I think, only have like 45 health. They get destroyed by archers, destroyed by cavalry because the gap gets closed too quick. And honestly, even against infantry, they don't trade well. So, sure, you know, they're strong, but they just die to like literally everything. So, for that reason, they're going to find themselves down in the D tier. Not quite as bad as the Elephant Archers, but they are pretty bad. Up next, we have the Genies crossbowmen, which is the Italian unique unit. This is basically a crossbowman which attacks a little bit more slowly, but has a bonus damage against cavalry. So if you're up against the cavalry civ, I think this unit's really strong. But in terms of like fun to use, for me, I'd rather just use arbalests in like 99% of cases because they just attack quicker. They're, you know, a little bit more consistent in their, you know, frame delay. You know, there's less of a delay when attacking with the arbalest than compared to Genies crossbowmen. So they can be fun to use if you're up against cavalry, but other than that, they're kind of just less fun. So for me, they're going to find themselves in the C tier. Up next, we have the Condotiaro. This is the Italian unique unit, which you can build from barracks if you're the Italians or allies of the Italians. Basically, it's a unit that has a bonus against gunpowder. Really nothing special about them. They don't have any elite. They're strong in, you know, early Castle Age maybe, but they don't really feel that fun to use. They look kind of cool. They look kind of similar to Huskarls, but maybe not quite as cool, but not really a fan of them either, so they'll find themselves in the C tier as well. They're not a bad unit by any means, but just not that cool, not that fun to use. Up next, we have the Huskarl, which is the Goths unique unit. Now, this is another unit that looks really cool. One of my favorite units for a long time. They're pretty much impervious to arrows. Sure, they get destroyed by melee units usually, but archers, they literally walk through archer fire, they walk through castle fire, walk through town center fire. Super fun. If you get a bunch of Huskarls flooding into your enemy's eco, I mean, the game is over. They look cool, they're fun, you know, they got good bonus against buildings because of the Goths, but honestly, you know, they're not the best unit, but they're just a fun one to use, and I just enjoy spamming these units as Goths, so they're going to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, I believe we have the Imperial Camel, which is another one of the Indian unique units. This one is basically an upgrade to their heavy camel, which turns them into Imperial Camels, and it's kind of like similar to a Paladin. A little bit less HP, I believe, less damage, maybe less armor, maybe similar armor, but of course, really good bonus against cavalry, so feels really good to use up against other cavalry or cavalry archer civs. It's really a pretty fun unit. It's really expensive to get the tech. It's pretty comparable to the Paladin upgrade, I believe. But if you do get it and you're playing as Indians, it's super fun, especially if you're up against Civ, which is building like heavy cavalry or scouts or cavalry archers. I mean, you just absolutely destroy those units. So in the right situation, it's a really fun unit. Feels super good to use, but if they're not building any type of mounted units, then it feels pretty underwhelming. So it'll kind of average out into a B tier for me. Up next, we have the Jaguar Warriors. Honestly, the sound that this unit makes when they attack is super satisfying. I love hearing this unit attack. And honestly, it's kind of similar to Imperial Camel for me, where if the enemy is building infantry, because of course Jaguar Warriors have like a +10 or +11 bonus against infantry, you're going to absolutely destroy them. But if they're not building infantry, then they kind of get destroyed by a lot of stuff, because they don't have a ton of health, not a ton of armor, not super quick, but in the right situation, Jaguar Warriors are amazing. In the wrong situation, they're pretty underwhelming, so they also are going to find themselves in the B tier. Up next, we have the Janissaries, or Janissaries, I'm not sure what the pronunciation is on that. But this unit, I would say, you know, I think of them as stormtroopers. If you've ever seen the Star Wars movies, these guys cannot hit anything if their life depended on it. They have 8 range, which is pretty long. But if an enemy is actually at that 8 range, the chances that you're hitting them with a Janissary is pretty low. But with that in mind, if you have a mass of Janissaries, it feels really good. They have really high damage output in Castle Age and Imperial Age. And so I love playing Turks, and I love building just a huge mass of Janissaries and just completely wiping the floor with any enemies. They do get countered by some units, but if you have a big mass of Janissaries, I mean, there's nothing stopping you, and they look cool, they sound cool, it's cool to shoot stuff. You know, Janissaries gonna find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Incas Kamiyuk. This is the kind of interesting melee unit because it's a melee unit, a spear unit more specifically, but it also has a range of 1, like Step Lancers. So it can attack stuff from a range of 1, you know, before other melee units are able to get a hit in, they're able to get a hit in first. So they're kind of good. You know, they're a spear unit, like I said, so they're great against cavalry. But really not super strong against other units. If you have a big mass of them, they can be pretty good against other infantry, because sometimes you can kill an infantry unit before they can even get a hit off because of that range. But overall, I will say this unit's, I don't know, not my favorite. It's not super strong unless you're up against cavalry, so the Kamiyuk gonna find itself in the C tier. Up next, we have Slingers, which is basically a skirmisher for melee units or infantry, because it has a minimum range, but it does deal bonus damage against infantry. So if you're up against a lot of infantry, Slingers can be pretty good, but the minimum range is kind of annoying, and they cost a decent amount of gold, so not really a huge fan of Slingers. And if you're up against anything besides infantry, they're pretty bad. So I almost never really build Slingers, not really that fun to use, so they're going to find themselves down in the D tier. Up next, we have the Jaguar Warrior. This is the Malay unique unit, and this unit is unique because it only costs half a population space, so you can spam a ton of them. Even in a 200 pop game, you can easily get like 300 of these guys out of the map potentially, and I would say that's kind of where they're best used. You know, you get a mass of like 20 karambits here, 20 karambits here, 20 karambits here, 20 karambits here, and you just send them to all different parts of your enemy's base, because if they have 1 or 2 armies, it's really hard to respond to that many threats, and I would say that's kind of the best case scenario for a Karambit Warrior. So if you're able to spread out your threats and just send them all over the place, they can be pretty good, but of course, costing only half a population space. They're low cost, but also they are low damage and low health, so they're not the best unit, but even in post-Imperial Age, if you get all the upgrades, they can deal some good damage, so they'll find themselves up in the A tier for me. I think they're pretty fun, pretty unique, and only costing half a population space, and even just seeing, you know, like 150, 200, 300, you know, potentially even 350 Karambit Warriors on the map at the same time is always pretty fun, so definitely love spamming that unit. Up next, we have the Keshik, which is the Tatars unique unit, and this unit is kind of comparable to the Knight line, maybe a cavalry in Imperial Age, or Cavalier that is. And this unit is unique because when it attacks other units, not buildings, just other units, it brings in a trickle of gold. And it's a relatively small trickle of gold. You know, sure, it can help cover the cost in the long run if they're really surviving a long time, but I would say on average, a Keshik is maybe going to bring in maybe 5, maybe 10 gold in its life. So, you know, it's there, but I don't really think of the gold effect as that much. And as far as Keshiks go, they're not really that cool. They're not a super strong, powerful unit. They are pretty cheap to make. But personally, I'm not really a huge fan of them. They're just kind of mediocre for me. Gonna find themselves in the C tier. Up next, we have the Tatar's other unique unit, which is the Flaming Camel, which is available after they research one of their unique techs, which gives their trebuchets +2 range. And honestly, I kind of like the Flaming Camel. It has a bonus against cavalry, so it doesn't really deal a whole lot of damage against anything else. Doesn't really do great against buildings like petards, but if your enemy is spamming cavalry, you can definitely bust these out. Personally, anytime I'm playing the Tatars, if I'm far enough ahead, I'm always busting these out. It's kind of just, you know, a bit of a BM move, you know, but it's always just fun to see the Flaming Camels, and when the enemy's losing and then they see the Flaming Camels, they're like, ah, come on. So, a pretty fun unit, pretty goofy, but for me, they're going to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Kip Jack, which is the Cumin unique unit. That's right, the Cumins. And this unit throws, I guess, fires multiple arrows, so it's kind of interesting. Similar to the Chikun, where it fires multiple projectiles, but instead of firing them back to back to back, the Kip Jack fires them all at once. You know, one primary arrow dealing the main damage, and then 2 other ones, and I think maybe 3 other ones for the Imperial Kip Jack. And this unit is kind of fun. They fire super quick. There's a very short delay between when you click to fire and when they actually fire the arrow, so it can be really fun to use them like that. But in terms of power, they're not my favorite, but overall in Castle Age, if you get a big mass of these, they are really good. In Imperial Age, you know, the Cumins are missing bracers, so they don't have much range, but in Castle Age, Kipjacks can be really fun to use, and like I said, I like mounted mounted range units, and the Kip Jack is no different. Really enjoy microing this one. If you get like 8 to 10 Kip Jacks, you can run through the enemy eco and just like one-shot pretty much any unit in Castle Age, so feels really good. Really like using this unit. It does fall off in Imperial Age, but in Castle Age, it's fun enough to find itself in the A tier. Up next, we have the Conic, which is the Bulgarian unique unit. It's interesting because it's a mounted unit, and then when it dies, it turns into an infantry. So it's got that 2 life sort of thing going on. And the infantry is relatively weak. I think it's only got like 45 HP for the regular Conic. I'm not sure about the Imperial Conic, but early Conic that is. But overall, it's a unique unit in the sense that, you know, it has 2 lives, but it's not my favorite unit to use. It doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of damage output, not super fun to mass or anything. So for me, it's going to find itself in a C tier. Up next, we have the Lightus, which is the Lithuanians unique unit. And this unit is pretty unique in the sense that it ignores melee armor. So if you're up against a civilization, you know, maybe like, you know, somebody who's building the Boyar, the Elite Boyar, or Elite Teutonic Knight, or anything else with really high melee armor, it can feel really good. And even if you're just up against something with a little bit of melee armor, it can feel strong as well. But honestly, I just like building this unit because they look cool. You know, whether they're that strong or not, I think they're a really cool mounted unit. So I always go for these as Lithuanians, and for that reason, can find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have Elite Longbowmen, or just, I guess, Longbowmen. I always think of them as elite because that's usually when I start having fun with them. But Longbowmen, you know, as you know, the Britain's unique unit. In Imperial Age, you can get 6 plus 6 range, so 12 range on your Elite Longbowmen. And that's insane. You know, I said before, I don't really love unmounted ranged units, but Longbowmen are the exception because anything that has 12 range is going to be fun. And, you know, you get a massive like 40-50 Elite Longbowmen with 12 range, and you're just like firing at stuff from so far away. It's really satisfying to use. So Longbowmen, you know, sure they're not mounted, but they're still good enough for me to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Magyar Hussar, which is of course the Magyar unique unit. And after their unique tech, they no longer cost gold. So basically, a Hussar you build from castles, which is just way stronger. You know, it's got more health, more attack, I believe more armor, a bonus against siege. This is another unit that looks really cool. And as Magyars, I just love spamming these out of my castle. Definitely another fun unit, gonna find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Mamluk, or you know, as it's commonly called, the Memluk, because a lot of people think this unit is kind of trash. It's too expensive. You know, upgrades are too much. But personally, I love this unit. I'm not a huge fan of Saracens as a civilization, but I absolutely love the Mamluk, whether it's Castle Age Mamluk or Elite Mamluk. This thing is so good. You know, it deals melee damage and it has like 4 range, so super fun to use. You know, you get like 3 or 4 of these into your enemy's eco, and you can pick off villagers left and right. They're quick, good damage. Honestly, really fun to use. They got great bonus against cavalry as well. Like for me, there's really no unit that's just super good against Mamluk because, you know, melee units like spears, pikemen, halberdier just get killed because Mamluk can just throw their scimitars and then run away. Archers, you can kind of run up on them and deal a lot of damage. And then cavalry, of course, they have bonus against cavalry. So really for me, Mamluk feels super good to use, and they're going to find themselves up in the S tier. Speaking of counters, we have Mangudai, and of course, you know, everybody talks about how Mangudai really have no counter, and it's pretty true. You get to Elite Mangudai fully upgraded in Imperial Age as the Mongols, and it just feels unstoppable. You know, you get 40-50 Mangudai, and I'm not sure there's any army that can beat that amount of Mangudai. This unit, I talked about microing. Microing Mangudai is probably the most fun in the game. I think besides Kip Jacks, they have the shortest delay between when you click to attack something and when they start firing. Super fun. They got bonus against, you know, a lot of different things, including siege, which is normally kind of the counter to archers. So Mangudai feels super good to use. It's really hard to put them anywhere but the S tier. Up next, we have Missionaries, which is the Spanish unique unit, one of them, the monastery unit. And it's basically a monk that's on a donkey. I think they cost the same. I could be wrong on that. Maybe they cost more. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they have a shorter range than monks, both for conversion and for healing. And then they also can't carry relics. So for me, I never really find a situation where I want to use these because when I'm using monks, that range is usually one of the most crucial things. You know, you're trying to convert something before it can close the gap and kill you. And having a shorter range on missionary is just really not that helpful. So they're going to find themselves down in the D tier. Up next, we have Organ Guns, which is the Portuguese unique unit. And honestly, you know, some people say it's a strong unit, looking at you, the Viper. But honestly, I'm not really a huge fan of the unit myself. Even when I get a good mass of the organ guns, it still really feels kind of underwhelming. I feel like I just died a cavalry or, a good mangonel shot or something. So, organ gun, it's not bad, but I'm not a huge fan. So it's going to find itself in the C tier. Up next, we have Plumed Archers, another, unmounted archer unit. So you think I'm not going to like it, but they are really quick moving. Part of the reason I like mounted archer units is because they're fast and they're easy to micro. And even though they're not mounted, plumed archers for the Mayans are really quick and really easy to micro. So I do like using them. Sure, you got to make them from castles, but still super fun to use. They're pretty cheap as well, so pretty easy to mass up. And I love massing archers and microing them. So plumed archers, for me, they're actually going to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Rattan Archer. This is basically kind of a cross between a skirmisher and an archer. They're, have decent attack, decent range, but then also really high pierce armor, so they pretty much counter any other archer. So they're really good in that situation, but in terms of building them, it doesn't really feel that good to build. I'm not a huge fan of units that are kind of strictly counter units. On their own, they're still good, but personally as Vietnamese, I'd rather just go for Arbalest myself. So, they're just going to find themselves in a C tier. Up next, we have the Imperial Skirmisher, which is another one of the Vietnamese unique units available to the Vietnamese or any allies of the Vietnamese. And these, I believe they get +1 range and +1 attack, if I'm correct on that. Maybe +1 armor, +1 attack. I can't remember exactly, but basically, it's a skirmisher, but better. If you're into the late game in a 1v1 and people are running out of gold, you definitely want to go for the Imperial Skirmisher upgrade. It's going to make your skirmishers, just that much better. And so in a team game, not really necessary if you're not building skirmishers, but in 1v1s, I have had a lot of fun building Imperial Skirmishers and Halberdier as the Vietnamese. I mean, it's just such a strong trash army in the late game that, sure, it's not the strongest unit, but in a trash fight, I do really like it, so it's going to find itself in the B tier. Up next, we have the Samurai, which is, of course, the Japanese unique unit, which does bonus damage against other unique units. So if your opponent's spamming unique units, Samurai going to tear them apart. But also, just as a unit, I think Samurai is a really strong unit. They're kind of like a champion, maybe not quite as strong in the 1v1, but they are faster moving. And for me, if I'm playing Japanese, they got the faster attacking infantry, I'm usually going to go for the Samurai. They look cool, they sound cool, and they're fun to build. So Samurai going to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Sicilian Sergeants, and these things, they're kind of like the jack of all trades, but master of none for me. They have okay attack, they got decent melee armor, and they got decent pierce armor. They got decent HP, they got, I would say below average move speed. So they're kind of doing a lot of different things, but they don't do anything really well. The only really unique thing about them is that they can build donjons, which for me I don't think are very good either. They cost 175 stone, which is more than a tower, but not really that much greater than a tower. I mean, sure, they can build more sergeants, but like I said, I'm not a huge fan of sergeants. For a unique unit, I really like them to have a special identity or just to look cool. And sergeants, their only identity is building the donjons, so not a huge fan of them, so they're going to find themselves down in the D tier. Up next, we have the Ethiopian Shotel Warrior. This unit is kind of like the glass cannon of Age of Empires. They have relatively low HP, but they are fast moving and super, super high attack. I think it's like 16 for the basic Shotel Warrior. Honestly, you drop a castle in Castle Age and you get the unique tech that allows Shotels to be produced almost instantly. You just constantly flood these into your enemy's base. And, kind of like Karambit Warriors, it's hard to respond when you have that many units all over the place. They're also pretty good in the late game. Sometimes I'll be losing my base, but I sneak over to the enemy's base, I drop a castle just outside, and then I sneak in a bunch of Shotels, and you can just destroy buildings super quick. With the high attack, the fast move speed, you can literally take 10 of them, walk up to a town sniper, take it down in like 5-6 seconds. So Shotel Warriors, honestly, I really like this unit a lot. They're kind of niche, kind of glass cannon, but when you can make them work, they feel really good, so they're going to find themselves up in the S tier as well. Up next, we have the Tarkin. This is the Hun's unique unit, and they got good pierce armor, and they're good against buildings. So this is a really great raiding unit. They're kind of like the mounted Shotel, but more tanky, but not quite as much damage against other units, but still great against buildings. Tarkins as well. You take 8 to 12 of these, walk them into the enemy town center in the late game, and you can knock that thing down pretty quick. Tarkins, honestly, just a fun unit to build, and gonna find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Teutonic Knights. Now, this unit, honestly, is, in my opinion, the coolest looking unit in the game. Whether we're looking at Age of Conquerors or Definitive Edition, I think these things just look so cool. They got their cape, they got their sword, they got their helmet. I love playing the Teutons, and I love the Teutonic Knight. Super high melee armor. I mean, in a 1v1, I think the only thing that they lose to is an Elite War Elephant. So honestly, absolutely love this unit. Looks super cool. Sure, they're super slow, but they are so fun to build, and they're going to find themselves up in the S tier. Up next, we have the Throwing Axeman. This is the Frankish unique unit. And for me, it's kind of like a Gabeto, but better. Because, sure, it doesn't move as quick. It doesn't quite have as high of damage. But they're tankier. They're more consistent. I feel like the projectiles hit more often. And honestly, they just look cooler, in my opinion. They're throwing a huge axe instead of a, you know, I don't even know what Gabetos are throwing out of their, like, slings or their lacrosse sticks or whatever it is. But Throwing Axemen, I think they're pretty cool, and they feel pretty good to use. So they'll find themselves in a very solid B tier. Up next, we have War Elephants, which is the Persian unique unit. And as I said, this is the only unit I think that beats a Teutonic Knight in a 1v1. You know, late game, elite Persian War Elephants, they got 600 HP. There's no other unit individually that is stronger for one population space. And it's so fun. If you make it to late game in a team game as Persians and you get a mass of elite War Elephants, it just feels unbeatable. Feels so great. Love to use them. Definitely going to be in the S tier as well. Up next, we have the War Wagon. Now, who knows what it is? Is it a cavalry archer? You know, is it a siege unit? Is it a mounted unit? I mean, who knows? You know, it's so confusing. Nobody really knows what you're building when you're building a, you know, a Korean war wagon. Do you build skirmishers? You know, do you build pikemen? Do you go for monks? What do you do? I feel like every time I build this unique unit, my enemies don't really know what they're building. I mean, partially because I'm not at a very high elo, but I absolutely love this unit. You get a mass of Korean war wagons, and they just feel so good to use. They're pretty quick. Sure, they're kind of clunky because they have a big hitbox, but you get 10 to 20 of them, and they feel really good to use. I love this unit in Castle Age and in Imperial Age. Just always feels great. Plus, they look cool. You know, you literally got a wagon that's firing basically, you know, scorpion projectiles, or maybe galleon projectiles. But honestly, they're going to find themselves up in the S tier. Definitely love that unit. Up next, we have the Celts Woad Raider. This shirtless guy is basically a fast-moving champion with a big bonus against buildings. Castle Age Woad Raiders, I'd never recommend building them. They are really weak. I think they only have like 8 or 9 attack. But Imperial or Elite Woad Raiders are super good. Really strong unit. A great unit in Imperial Age. They're quick moving. You know, kind of like Tarkin. You can run into the enemy base and take down a town center just like that. So it feels pretty good. Again, Castle Age, garbage. Probably in F tier in Castle Age. But in Imperial Age, probably a solid A tier. So that'll kind of average out and end up in about the B tier. Up next, we have the Hussite Wagon, which is one of the new unique units from the Bohemian Civ. And this unit is kind of interesting. It's doing a lot of different things. It's basically a mobile tank, but if enemy arrows fly over it to hit one of your other units, they take reduced damage, and the Hussite Wagon absorbs a little bit of that damage. Hussite Wagons have super high pierce armor, so archers do pretty much nothing to them. They're supposedly countered by mangonels, but I really don't feel like they even deal that much damage to them. Hussite Wagons, if you get a big mass of them into the enemy base, like, there's really nothing they can do. They're just so tanky, and if you get some archers to support them, it feels really good to use. They are expensive, are kind of slow, but honestly, I like using this unit. Pretty fun. Some people think they're going to be nerfed. I'm not really sure, but for now, I think they're a very solid B tier. Pretty fun to use. Up next, we have the Obuk, which is the Polish unique unit. This unit is really interesting because every single attack removes 1 melee and pierce armor from a unit. So as it attacks, it's becoming stronger and stronger. So it is a pretty good unit. It's not my favorite unit in the game, but you know, some people think it's really good. I don't think it looks that cool. It's not that satisfying to use. So for me, it's only going to find itself in the C tier. I know some people are going to say it's stronger than that, but you know, like I said, I just don't really like using it that much. Up next, we have the Hoofniets or Haufniets. I'm not really sure how to say that one either. This is another Bohemian unit, but this is the upgrade to the Bombard Cannon. So it gives it more damage, more bonus against buildings. So basically a Bombard Cannon, but stronger. Bombard Cannon's already a really strong unit. But this unit in itself, you know, some people think it's not really quite worth the upgrade cost. It is pretty expensive to go through the upgrade, so maybe if you're going to build a lot of Bombard Cannons, you can go for it, but if not, it's usually not quite worth it. I love Bombard Cannons, but for me, the upgrade cost is not really always worth going for, so it's only going to find itself in the C tier. Up next, we have the Turtle Ships, which is another one of the Korean unique units. This is probably my favorite ship in the game. It looks super cool, it's tanky, it fires a cannonball. Sure, it's short range, sure, it's slow and clunky, but turtle ships, come on, they just look so cool, so satisfying to use, and they are super, super beefy, so they're going to find themselves up in the A tier. Up next, we have the Viking longboats. These are the Vikings dock unique unit. They're, you know, pretty quick. You can mass them up fairly easily, and you can also kind of compact them up quite a bit as well. So they're super good to micro. You know, normally ships are kind of annoying to try and micro, but longboats, not a problem at all. They fire a bunch of arrows. If you get a big mass of longboats, you can one-shot like pretty much any ship besides a turtle ship, of course. But longboats, honestly, they're pretty fun to use, pretty good at taking down buildings as well because they fire so many arrows, so they're also going to find themselves up in the A tier just for different reasons. Last but not least, we have the Caravel, which is the Portuguese unique unit. Now this thing is kind of seen as the Scorpion of the Sea because it's like a galleon, but its projectile travels through multiple ships. So if the enemy has a big clump of ships, you know, specifically, these are seen as a counter to longboats because longboats, you can clump them together so much and micro them so easily. So if you get a few Caravels to fire on some longboats, you can usually get your shots travel through, you know, several ships. So if the enemy is doing something like that, Caravels can be pretty good. But other than that, I feel like they're just a weaker galleon. So they have their place for sure up against Vikings, but oftentimes you're usually just better to go for galleons. So Caravels gonna find themselves in the C tier. Well, that's my list. I hope you guys enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts.